The camera opens cold, wide, and unforgiving. Courtroom 14B, Montgomery County Superior Court. Morning light presses through narrow frosted windows and flat gray sheets. The room smells of old wood, new tension, and the particular kind of dread that accumulates in places where people's lives are legally disassembled. The gallery is half full, faces turn. Whisper, assess. On the left side of the aisle, Damien Voss's side, there are people. His attorney Gerald Finch shuffles papers with practiced ease. Two colleagues in expensive coats occupy the second row. His assistant. His financial advisor. A woman from his PR firm who technically is not supposed to be here but is sitting close enough to the aisle to be useful. On the right side of the aisle, Eleanor Voss Hartwell's side, there is one chair. And in it, alone, sits Eleanor. No attorney at her table. She dismissed hers 3 weeks ago, and no one knows why. No family in the gallery, no friends, no support. Just Eleanor, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, hazel eyes tracking the door of the judge's chamber with the patience of someone counting something the rest of the room cannot see. Damien notices this. He turns, lets his eyes travel slowly across the empty right side of the gallery, and the corner of his mouth lifts. He says, quietly to Finch, barely masking satisfaction, she really came alone. Finch does not look up from his papers. Apparently, he says. Damien exhales, soft, satisfied. Good. He leans back in his chair and adjusts the gold tie bar with one finger. In the gallery, a woman leans toward her neighbor and whispers loud enough to carry she let her lawyer go. Can you believe that? Going against Finch with no one in her corner. Her neighbor shakes her head with the particular sympathy people perform when they have already decided something is hopeless. Eleanor does not react. She has heard. She always hears. She simply breathes, slow, controlled, quiet, and folds her hands one more time as though her stillness is a choice she keeps choosing. The bailiff calls the room to order, the gavel falls, and Eleanor Voss Hartwell sits completely alone at her table and does not flinch. Judge Price enters, the room rises, she settles, surveys, and the room sits. Judge Price reads from the docket, case number 2024 CV 08817. Voss versus Voss Hartwell. Division of marital assets, contested property claim on the Hartwell estate annex, and counter motion regarding the Meridian trust accounts. She removes her glasses and looks at the respondent's table. Miss Voss Hartwell, she says, you're representing yourself today? A ripple moves through the room. Heads turn. Finch allows himself the smallest smile. Eleanor stands, clear and steady. Yes, Your Honor, pro se representation for today's preliminary hearing. A beat. Judge Price studies her for a moment with professional neutrality. You understand the petitioner is represented by Gerald Finch of Finch, Aldridge, and Cross, she says. Eleanor does not waver. I'm aware, Your Honor. Judge Price pauses once more, then speaks. Very well. Mr. Finch, you may proceed with the opening statement. Finch rises. He is one of those attorneys who treats a courtroom like a stage. He moves to the center, faces the gallery briefly as though reminding everyone that this is, indeed, a performance. Thank you, Your Honor, he begins. A pause for effect. What we have here today is, at its core, a straightforward matter. A marriage that concluded. Assets that must be divided fairly. My client, Damien Voss, asks only for what is equitable under the law. He pauses, turns slightly toward Eleanor's table. The respondent, we note, has chosen to proceed without legal counsel. We have no comment on that decision. We will, however, note, for the record, that the properties under dispute include assets my client brought to this marriage. The Meridian Trust, the Clarendon Avenue property, and the business shares in Voss Capital Holdings. He lets that sentence land, then gathers his portfolio and sits. We look forward to a clear and efficient resolution, Your Honor. Applause would be unseemly. The gallery's body language provides it anyway. A collective lean toward Damien's side, a collective exhale of foregone conclusion. Eleanor rises without theatrics. Your Honor, I have a brief opening statement. She does not move to the center of the room. She speaks from where she stands, and somehow that stillness commands more attention than Finch's entire performance. The Meridian Trust, the Clarendon property, and the Voss Capital shares, my husband correctly identifies them as part of this proceeding. What he has not mentioned is the documentation I will be presenting today regarding their origin. I intend to be brief, accurate, and thorough. That's all I ask of this court. She sits. The brevity clearly unsettles something in the room. People expected panic or defense or tears. They got 3 sentences and a spine. Finch leans toward Damien and speaks quietly. She's bluffing. Damien watches Eleanor with the look of a man who has already counted his winnings. She doesn't have anything, he says low. I made sure of it. The hearing proceeds. Finch methodically dismantles Eleanor's position, producing documents, financial histories, property valuations, asset timelines. He is relentless, polished, and deliberate. The picture he paints is clear. Eleanor Voss Hartwell is a woman without resources, without allies, and without a legal leg on which to stand. Every time he presents something, the gallery shifts a little more toward Damien's side. A woman in the 3rd row whispers to her companion she came all this way for nothing. When Finch presents the contested account documentation, he gestures toward Eleanor's table with courteous condescension. Does the respondent wish to cross-examine? Eleanor looks at the documents. She looks at the gallery. She looks at Damien, who is looking at her the way one looks at a closed chapter. She stands. I have questions for the document preparer, yes, but I'll hold them until the appropriate evidentiary moment, Your Honor. Finch blinks. Barely. But Eleanor catches it. She sits back down. Alone. Perfectly still. And from somewhere in her expression, so subtle it almost isn't there, something that looks less like defeat and more like patience. But the room has already decided what it sees. The room sees a woman losing, alone, and already gone. Cut to a memory. Soft, warm, golden. Eleanor is 22. She is sitting at a long mahogany dining table in a house that announces its own significance quietly, oil portraits in gilded frames, fresh-cut dahlias in crystal vases, silver candlesticks that have attended 3 generations of dinners. Across the table, her grandmother, Margaret Clare Hartwell, is watching her with those gunmetal eyes and the particular expression she reserves for the moments she considers important. Margaret speaks without rushing, pouring tea without looking down. There will be men in your life, Eleanor, who mistake your quietness for weakness. A pause. Let them. Quietness is how we listen, and listening is how we know exactly what to say and when. Back to present. The courtroom. Eleanor's hands in her lap, her thumb tracing a small circle against her palm, a private gesture no one in the room would recognize. Her internal voice speaks, measured and unhurried. My grandmother built Hartwell Industries from a single textile mill in 1971, the year her husband died and left her with 3 children, 40 employees, and $18,000 in debt. 30 years later, she sold the 4th division for $2.3 billion and kept the rest. My father took his seat in the Senate the year I turned 7. I grew up at dinner tables where power was discussed the way other families discuss the weather, constantly, practically, without sentiment. Cut to another memory. Eleanor is 12, sitting in the Senate gallery, watching her father on the floor below deliver an argument that reverses a committee vote. She is eating a peppermint and watching with absolute focused attention. I know what power looks like. I know what it sounds like. I know how it moves into a room. Back to the courtroom. So when I sat across from Damien at our first mediation session 2 years ago, when I watched him smile that particular smile and begin to inventory everything he believed I was without, I made a decision. She watches Finch present another document. She does not move. I decided not to show him what I had. Not yet. Cut to 3 weeks ago. Eleanor's apartment, spare, elegant, deliberately simplified since the separation. She is on the phone, standing at her kitchen window in the gray pre-dawn, speaking quietly. No, she says, not the preliminary. The preliminary is theater. He needs to believe he has won it completely. A pause, listening. Yes, Papa. I know. Softer, with great tenderness. I know, but trust me. A beat. I learned from the best women in this family how to choose the right moment. This is the right moment. Her father's voice is faintly audible through the phone, low, reluctant, loving. Your grandmother hasn't slept, he says. Eleanor allows herself a brief, private smile. Tell her I haven't either. But we both know which one of us is using that time more productively. A beat of silence, and then, from the phone, the sound of a 78-year-old woman's dry, precise laugh. Back to the courtroom. Eleanor blinks. Returns to the present. I came here alone today because it was necessary. Because a man who believes he has already won stops paying attention. And a man who stops paying attention, a breath, does not see what is coming. She had dismissed her attorney not from despair, but from calculation. She had reviewed every document Damien had filed, every financial motion, every evidentiary exhibit, herself, alone, over 6 weeks of late nights and early mornings, with a precision born from being raised in a family where intellectual rigor was the family language. She found 3 things Finch did not know she had found. She has told no one in this room about them. Not yet. My grandmother always said that the most powerful move is the one your opponent isn't watching for. She said it the first time when she was teaching me chess at 9 years old. She has said it in different rooms for different reasons in the 53 years since. Eleanor looks at the courtroom door once. Quick, quiet, private. Then she folds her hands, resets her expression, and turns back to the hearing. She was right about everything. She is always right. And in the gallery, no one notices that Eleanor Voss Hartwell just checked the door. No one is watching her carefully enough to notice. That, she thinks, is exactly the problem with underestimating someone. You stop watching them. The mid-morning recess. The gallery disperses into murmured conversation. Damien stands near the window, jacket unbuttoned, looking out at the street below with the posture of a man who has stopped keeping score because he believes the game is decided. He turns to Finch as he approaches, lighting up with satisfaction. She's got nothing. You can see it. Finch is measured. She's very composed for someone with nothing. Damien is dismissive. That's just how she is, always performing dignity. He loosens his cuff. She grew up wealthy, or so she told me. Some old family money from Virginia, some senator father she almost never spoke about. I had my team check. The Hartwell estate is locked in a trust. She can't access it. She's been living off the joint accounts since the separation. Finch is quiet for a moment too long. Damien notices. What? Finch speaks carefully. I'm sure you're right. But he opens his portfolio and rereads something, quickly, once, and then closes it. Outside, in the marble corridor, Eleanor stands at a tall window with a cup of water she has not drunk. Her phone screen is lit. She is reading a text. The camera catches the screen just long enough for one line to register. Leaving now. Should be there by 11:30. Eleanor locks the screen. She drinks the water. She does not smile, not exactly, but something shifts in her face like weather changing in a high window. Inside the courtroom, a clerk approaches Judge Price's bench and passes her a sealed envelope. The judge opens it without expression, reads, and sets it face down beside her docket. In the gallery, Damien's financial advisor, a thin, precise man named Crane, has been on his phone since the recess began. He stands abruptly, crosses the room, and speaks quietly into Damien's ear. Damien's expression does not change, but his jaw tightens slightly. What do you mean you can't reach the file preparer? He says, low. Crane keeps his voice down. His office says he's unavailable. All day. A beat. Damien speaks measured and controlled. That's fine. We don't need him. Everything's already in evidence. But he looks at Eleanor's table across the room. She is not there yet, still in the corridor. Her chair sits empty, perfectly arranged, her single folder of documents aligned precisely with the table's edge. Something about that precision bothers him in a way he cannot name. The bailiff calls the recess's end. People file back in. The gallery resettles. The doors at the back of the courtroom, heavy oak and brass fitted, close with their customary soft thunder, all except one. One door, in the back, does not fully latch. A clerk notices and pushes it, and it swings back open an inch as if held by something on the other side. As if something on the other side is not ready to be closed out yet. The clerk frowns, tries once more, and gives up, leaving the door slightly ajar. A whisper of cool air from the corridor enters the room. Eleanor takes her seat, folds her hands. And from somewhere only she can perceive, she begins to count. The afternoon session opens with Finch calling his final witness, a financial analyst who walks the court through the asset valuations with practiced clarity. Every number confirms the same story. The Meridian Trust, the Clarendon property, the business shares, all under Finch's framing belonging fully and legally to Damien Voss. The analyst delivers his conclusions with academic composure, and Finch sits down with the satisfaction of a man who has just sealed an envelope. Judge Price looks to the respondent's table. Miss Voss Hartwell, your witness. Eleanor stands. The gallery watches with the particular attention people give to things they believe are already over, curious but not invested, the way an audience watches the final act when they already know the ending. Eleanor asks the analyst 2 questions. They are specific, technical, and surgical. The analyst pauses on the second one, a genuine pause, not a theatrical one, and his answer, when it comes, contains a small qualification that Finch had not prepared for. Not enough to derail anything, but enough. Eleanor thanks him and sits. Finch stands for redirect. He smooths the qualification back into the record with practiced ease, order restored. And then Finch turns to the judge. Your Honor, petitioner rests. I believe the evidentiary record is clear and complete. We are prepared for closing arguments at the court's discretion. Judge Price looks at Eleanor. Miss Voss Hartwell, does the respondent have any remaining witnesses or evidence to present before closing? The whole room holds something that is almost breath. Eleanor looks at her folder. She looks at the judge. She looks, briefly, at the clock on the far wall, 11:24. Something crosses her face, the smallest shadow of something that, in another person, in another moment, might be called fear. It is not fear, but it is the awareness of timing. And for one fraction of 1 second, the timing feels uncertain. She stands. Your Honor, I have. She pauses, and the pause is so quiet that the fluorescent hum of the courtroom fixtures becomes briefly audible. I have evidence and testimony to present. I ask the court for a brief indulgence before I do. Judge Price looks over her glasses, measured and precise. How brief? Eleanor's hand, beneath the table, presses flat against her folder. Just a few minutes, Your Honor, she says quietly. Damien turns to look at her. Finch turns. The gallery turns. And Eleanor Voss Hartwell stands at her table, alone, apparently without support, apparently without a next move, and she breathes, slow and steady, and she waits. The clock reads 11:25, and the courtroom sees only a woman, standing alone, at the edge of defeat. That is all they see. That is all they have ever seen. They have never been more wrong in their lives. 11:26 in the morning. The oak doors at the back of courtroom 14B open. Not swung open, not thrown open in the theatrical fashion of movies and fantasies. They are open the way power opens doors, slowly, fully, without apology, as though doors were always intended to open exactly this wide and anything less was an architectural error. The bailiff near the back wall straightens involuntarily. The first thing the gallery sees is them. There are 4 of them. Margaret Claire Hartwell enters first. 5 feet 4 inches tall, 78 years old. Black Chanel suit. South Sea pearls. Silver white hair without a single strand of compromise. She moves down the center aisle of courtroom 14B as though she has entered rooms like this one before and found them ultimately insufficient. Her gunmetal eyes sweep the room in approximately 2 seconds, the bench, the gallery, the petitioner's table, Finch, and finally Eleanor, and in that sweep she catalogues everything and is altered by nothing. The gallery does not know what to do with her. She does not give them time to decide. Behind her, Senator Arthur Joseph Hartwell III. He does not enter a room. He arrives in it. 6 feet 2 inches. Silver-haired. 3-term United States Senator. The Senate pin on his lapel catches the courtroom light, that small disc of legislative authority, and at least 4 people in the gallery recognize it in the same instant their eyes find his face. A murmur begins in the back rows, quiet but spreading, a brushfire of recognition moving through seats and shoulders and suddenly parted lips. Behind the senator, 2 individuals in dark suits carrying leather briefcases, not generic aides, not assistants, attorneys. Specifically, Nathaniel Cross of Finch, Aldridge, and Cross. Finch's own senior partner, and beside him, Dr. Isabel Reese Moreland, the most prominent estates and trusts litigator in the state of Virginia. A woman whose name appears in 3 separate landmark rulings that Finch himself has cited in briefs. The room processes this in stages. First, the doors opening. Then, the old woman, regal and unhurried. Then, the senator. Then, the attorneys. And the name on one briefcase that 2 gallery members with legal backgrounds see and recognize simultaneously. Then, The murmur becomes a ripple, becomes a sound that fills the room and has no clean word for what it is, because it is not quite shock, not quite awe, not quite the satisfaction of a reversal, but all three of those things arriving at the same moment in the same breath. At the petitioner's table, Damien Voss turns in his chair. He does it the way a person turns when they hear something behind them that their body registers before their mind catches up, a sharp, involuntary pivot. His eyes find the old woman first. He does not know her immediately. Then they find the senator, and in the time it takes for his brain to process the Senate pin, the silver hair, the bearing, the absolute absence of uncertainty in Arthur Hartwell's stride, Damien Voss goes very, very still. The confident lean, gone. The loosened cuff, forgotten. The gold tie bar catches the light, but there is no one left in his posture to enjoy it. He is sitting now the way a man sits when the architecture of everything he planned has just rearranged itself around him and he has not yet found the new walls. At the defense table, Gerald Finch, a man who has not looked rattled in a courtroom since 2009, has turned fully in his chair and is staring at the attorney behind the senator. He stares at Nathaniel Cross, his senior partner, in the opposing gallery, carrying a briefcase, and Nathaniel Cross, to his credit, meets Finch's eyes without particular expression and gives the smallest, almost imperceptible nod, a nod that contains somehow the entirety of an explanation that Finch will spend the rest of this day absorbing.
He has lost. More than the case, he has lost the sequence. And attorneys of his particular caliber understand that losing the sequence is worse than losing the verdict, because it means someone played a longer game than you did. Judge Price has removed her glasses.
She is watching the entrance with the focused attention of someone who has presided over courtrooms for 22 years and is currently witnessing something she will describe to her clerk later as categorically unprecedented in my room. Margaret Hartwell reaches the third row of the gallery, Eleanor's side, and stops. She does not sit. She stands in the aisle and looks at the bench. She speaks to Judge Price in a voice that carries without effort the way silence carries. Your Honor, she says. We apologize for the interruption to your proceedings. We ask for 1 moment of the court's indulgence before the respondent presents her evidence. A beat. Judge Price looks at Margaret Hartwell with the careful regard one gives to something one respects on sight. And you are? She asks quietly. Margaret tilts her chin, barely a centimeter, and the room waits for the answer as a collective held breath. Margaret Claire Hartwell, she says, of Hartwell Industries, the Hartwell Family Trust, and the respondent's maternal line for 3 generations. The murmur in the gallery does not settle. It deepens. Judge Price puts her glasses back on. You may be seated, she says, evenly. Senator Hartwell moves to stand beside Eleanor's table. He does not ask permission. He simply arrives at his daughter's side the way tides arrive at coastlines, inevitable, timed by something far older than the room. He looks at her, she looks at him. And in the private language of a father and daughter who have said most of the important things already, across phone calls before dawn and dinner tables that required more courage than any courtroom, something passes between them that has no legal name and needs none. He speaks quietly, only to her. We're here, he says. Eleanor nods once. Her chin holds. Across the room, Damien Voss has not moved. He is sitting in the posture of a man who has just heard a sound he cannot yet identify, but that his body already knows is something structural, the sound of a foundation shifting. His hands, which have been loose and confident on the table all morning, are now flat against the surface, pressing down as though the surface itself might give way beneath him. He looks at Finch. Finch is still looking at Nathaniel Cross. Finch is not looking back at Damien. Dr. Morland, the trust litigator, approaches Eleanor's table, sets down her briefcase, and opens it with 3 precise clicks. She removes a folder. A different folder from the one Eleanor has. This folder is thick, tabbed, and sealed with a notary stamp dated 18 months ago. Eleanor looks at that folder. Something in her exhale carries the weight of every night she spent alone with these documents. She says to Dr. Morland, quiet and steady, "Thank you for coming." Dr. Morland's answer is equally quiet. "You should have called us earlier." Eleanor breathes once. "I know," she says. A pause. "I needed him to see exactly what he'd walked into." Dr. Moreland places the folder on Eleanor's table and steps back. She stands with her hands clasped, utterly still, waiting. In the gallery, Damien's financial advisor Crane has his phone in both hands and is pressing something with the frantic urgency of a man trying to recall something that no longer exists on a server. He presses. Nothing. He presses again. In the back row, the woman who whispered earlier that Eleanor came all this way for nothing is sitting with her hand covering her mouth. Margaret Hartwell has taken her seat in the gallery, upright, composed, watching the bench with the patience of a woman who has long understood that courts are ultimately just rooms, and rooms are ultimately just geography, and geography does not determine outcome. People do. Judge Price surveys the changed room. She looks at Eleanor's table, now anchored by a senator on one side, a senior litigator organizing documents, and the full quiet weight of 3 generations of Hartwell standing behind it. She looks at the petitioner's table, at Damien Voss sitting in a suit that now fits differently than it did this morning, at Gerald Finch, who has finally stopped looking at his senior partner and is instead staring at the notarized folder on Eleanor's table with the expression of a man counting exits. Judge Price removes and replaces her glasses in a single practiced motion. "Miss Voss Hartwell," she says, with precision, "you indicated you had evidence and testimony to present." Eleanor stands. The room, every person in it, including the ones who have spent this morning pitying her or dismissing her, or quietly applauding her husband's clean and inevitable victory, watches Eleanor Voss Hartwell rise. She is the same woman who walked in this morning. Same gray wool dress. Same chignon, same pearl earrings, same hands, but the room around her has changed its mind about what it's looking at. And she, who knew all along, is simply, finally, allowing the room to see correctly. "Yes, Your Honor," she says. "I do." She opens the folder. "I'd like to begin with the documentation of the Meridian Trust's original funding structure, and specifically the source of the capital that Mr. Voss has this morning described as his own." She places the first document on the evidence table. The clock on the wall reads 11:31. And Courtroom 14B holds its breath. The documents are entered into evidence one by one. Dr. Moreline manages the presentation with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times in rooms far larger than this one. Each document lands on the evidence table with the quiet weight of a completed sentence. The picture assembles with devastating clarity. The Meridian Trust, established in 1998, the year Eleanor turned 8, by a joint family instrument signed by Margaret Clare Hartwell and Senator Arthur Hartwell. Eleanor was the named beneficiary. The funds that Damien had claimed as invested assets from Voss Capital were, in fact, a portion of Eleanor's family trust disbursement, transferred to a shared account in year 3 of the marriage under Eleanor's signature, legally, and Damien's claim that these constituted marital property. Stemming from his business was not merely incorrect. It was, as Dr. Moreland said simply, quietly, and without drama, documentably false, Your Honor. The timestamps, the notarized trust instrument, and the wire transfer records establish beyond dispute that these funds originated from the Hartwell Family Trust and were placed in the joint account by the respondent under separate consideration. They were never Voss Capital assets. They were never petitioner's property. Not before the marriage, not during it, and not now. Gerald Finch is sitting very still. He has not moved in 4 minutes. He is the kind of still that attorneys get when they realize, with professional precision, exactly when and how they were beaten, and how cleanly, and how completely, and how long ago the architect of that defeat had laid its foundation. Damien, beside him, is not still. His hand is on Finch's arm. His voice is a barely controlled whisper. "How did she get those documents?" he says, low and urgent. "You told me those transfers couldn't be traced to a trust instrument. You told me the trust wasn't accessible." Finch speaks very quietly, not looking at him. "I was given information that was apparently," he pauses, recalibrates, presses his lips together, "incomplete." Damien sharpens. "What does that mean?" Finch does not answer. Because Finch now understands, looking at Nathaniel Cross sitting in the gallery behind the senator, that the information he was given was not incomplete by accident. He was outmaneuvered in the preliminary. While he was performing confidence, someone else was building a case. He has lost. More than the case. He has lost the sequence. And attorneys of his particular caliber understand that losing the sequence is worse than losing the verdict, because it means someone played a longer game than you did. Damien turns. For the first time today, he looks at Eleanor with no performance in his face, no satisfaction, no contempt, no confident calculation. What remains, stripped of the costume of certainty, is something smaller and rawer and much harder to maintain in a room this size. He looks at her father, standing beside her table. He looks at her grandmother in the gallery, watching him with the composed patience of someone watching weather pass. He looks at Eleanor. And Eleanor looks back. She does not smile. She does not perform satisfaction or revenge. She simply looks at him, and the quality of that look, its absolute steadiness, its complete absence of anger, is more devastating than anything she could have said. Because it tells him, without words, that she never needed anger. She never needed desperation. She never needed anything he spent this morning believing she lacked. She had always had everything. She simply waited to let him see it. Judge Price speaks after reviewing the final document. "Mr. Finch," she says, "in light of this evidentiary submission, does the petitioner wish to request a continuance to review the materials?" Finch stands. He straightens his jacket. He is, at his core, a professional, and professionalism is the last thing a man keeps when everything else falls. "Yes, Your Honor," he says evenly. The petitioner requests a continuance. In the gallery, a soft collective sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a murmur, something between comprehension and consequence. Damien Voss closes his eyes for 1 second, just one, and in that second, his whole morning plays back to him differently. Court adjourns. The gallery empties slowly, the way rooms empty when people are still processing what they witnessed rather than simply leaving what they attended. People move toward the doors in quiet clusters, speaking low, glancing back. Eleanor stands at her table and begins organizing her documents. Dr. Morland stands beside her. Senator Hartwell places one large, steady hand briefly on his daughter's shoulder. Not a performance, not for anyone watching. Just a father's hand on his daughter's shoulder. That's all. That's everything. Margaret Hartwell moves from the gallery with the unhurried deliberateness that has characterized every step she has taken today. She reaches Eleanor's table, looks at her granddaughter for a long, quiet moment, and then, in a gesture that is so private and so precise that it belongs in no courtroom record, she takes Eleanor's face briefly in both hands and touches her forehead to Eleanor's. 1 second, maybe 2. Then she releases her, steps back, adjusts her pearl necklace. She speaks quietly, only to Eleanor. "Your grandfather would have been insufferable about this," she says. "He loved a well-timed entrance." Eleanor exhales a small, real, unguarded laugh, the first genuinely unguarded thing she has shown all day. Outside, in the corridor, Damien walks through the marble hallway with Finch beside him. There is nothing left to say between them. Their footsteps are the conversation. They walk in silence, past the gilded ceiling, past the portraits of former judges, past the world that this morning belonged to one version of Damien Voss and now belongs to a different one. Eleanor steps into the corridor with her father. She breathes. The marble is cool. The light is pale gold. She is not celebrated. She is not triumphant in any loud, retributive sense. She is simply standing, with her family beside her, in the light, which is, if you think about it, everything. And this is what Damien Voss never understood, and what cost him everything. He looked at a woman standing alone in a courtroom and thought he saw weakness. He saw no attorney, no family, no visible support. He saw an empty gallery and thought it told the whole story. But here is what isolation can look like when it is chosen rather than imposed. It looks like strategy. It looks like patience. It looks like a woman who knows exactly where her reinforcements are and exactly when to call them. Eleanor Voss Hartwell was never alone. She was simply waiting. And the people who loved her, who had always loved her, were simply waiting with her. The most dangerous thing you can do to someone who was raised by powerful, loving people is convince yourself that they have no one. Because those people, the ones shaped by generations of love and principle and quiet strength, they are never without their foundation. You simply cannot always see it, until the moment they choose to let you. Now, before we go, I have 3 questions I want to leave with you today. First, have you ever stayed silent in a difficult situation, not from weakness, but because you were waiting for exactly the right moment? Tell me in the comments how that played out. Second, is there someone in your life right now who underestimates you because they cannot see your support system? How does that feel, and what are you building quietly? And third, what do you think was the most powerful moment in this story? The family's entrance, Eleanor's stillness, or Margaret's quiet words at the end? I genuinely want to know. If this story moved something in you, if Eleanor's quiet dignity and her family's fierce, unwavering love reminded you that the most powerful support doesn't always arrive loudly, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Karma's Heiress, because every week we tell the stories of women who knew, even in their loneliest hours, that they were never ever as alone as their enemies needed to believe. I'll see you in the next one.